a geek. Talking baseball every week. 'Cause they're Gleeman and the Geek.
And welcome to Gleeman and the Geek Season Preview Edition. I'm John Bonus, TwinsDaily.com. With me in Minneapolis, Aaron Gleeman of TheAthletic.com.
Where are you?
I am in Las Vegas.
Of course.
In the Planet Hollywood casino and hotel, where I've been for too many nights. Truth be told, I'm going to be here yet one more night. So, when is the last time? The good news is I'm out of the dream state.
I don't know. I don't want to know what that means.
The dream state.
No, I don't want to know.
The first 48 hours of KFAN, because those shows are 3:30 to 7 in the morning, that you basically don't know if you're awake or asleep or drunk or sober or what, because you're trying to figure out, you're going to bed at 11 and waking up at 3:30 and drink until 7 and then go back to sleep. And then, I'm hitting the reset button today. They're all leaving today. I got one night in Vegas without the rooms and the power trip crazies with me.
I'm going to have to give you the same speech I give you in these circumstances all the time, which is you got to tone it down a notch or two, because you're like shot out of a cannon.
Okay.
You got to like breathe a little.
You are correct.
Yeah, we have a lot to talk about. Like you said, this will be sort of our season preview episode, because it's Saturday afternoon as we record this. The Twins opener is Thursday in Kansas City.
Right. They've
announced their opening day starter finally. Although it's funny that they were forced to do it. It's who I thought.
I thought it was going to be Sonny Gray. I mean, at the beginning of spring training, I thought it was going to be Sonny Gray.
Oh, Doe figured it out Monday. Doe sent me Doe Young Park, former guest, multi-time guest, and future guest of the podcast, who is maybe the only nerdier person than me, other than John, sent me he was at a layover at LaGuardia or something airport, coming back from Belgium, don't ask. And he sent me a spreadsheet, a color-coded spreadsheet of the Twins schedule for the first 2 weeks of the season and all of the starting pitchers.
Right.
And he said to me, look at this, tell me I'm crazy or not. He said it has to be Pablo Lopez on opening day. And I looked at it, and he was basically saying Pablo Lopez is the only guy that they don't care about getting, other than Joe Ryan, who they don't care about getting extra rest or, being able to bump him back. Obviously with Maeda, especially, they want to give him as much time as possible, all that stuff. So it lines up sort of nicely, though, that I think Lopez is a deserving opening day starter.
For sure.
Fine.
Yeah.
And he's the only, Gray and Lopez to me are sort of equals, I would say. I would maybe say Gray's had obviously a better career, longer career, but
for sure,
Lopez is also under team control for next season.
Yep.
Whereas Gray and Malley and Maeda, who are your other opening day choices, are free agents to be. And so if that's the tiebreaker, and then this also sets up Gray to start game 2 and Joe Ryan to start game 3, which means Sonny Gray can start the home opener.
Right.
Which is next. I don't even know. Next.
That's a week from Thursday.
Next 2 Thursdays from now.
Yep.
Yeah, against Houston. So I think, it doesn't really matter. I didn't even remember do you remember who started on opening day last year? I don't.
It was Joe Ryan.
Yeah, but I didn't remember that.
Yeah.
It wasn't.
I mean, but it was Joe Ryan out of default. There was nobody else.
Right. Everybody else was hurt, or Sonny Gray was behind schedule. And
right.
Yes, it was who do we have? Joe Ryan seems like a nice fellow. Let's do that.
Right. I mean,
part of me is
Sonny Gray or Dylan Bundy or Chris Archer.
Right.
Chris Archer, it was really?
Yeah. It's for whatever you want to say about the Twins rotation situation, and we'll see how it plays out. Obviously, I'm relatively optimistic. We'll talk more about this later in the show. But one thing you can say is it's much different than last year, in terms of what are we looking at day one. Last year we were looking at Bundy and Archer, and then who's after that? It was and then you had Paddock in the mix, who only ended up making 5 starts. Now there's some question marks, obviously, with Maeda and Malley and a bunch of other guys, but this is just such a better situation. And just in general, I don't know. It's I don't know. It's hard to say, is this the best on paper, the best Twins rotation since X year. Like I had been saying since the Johan Prime days.
Right.
But that's not saying that much, really.
Right.
Like they haven't had that many good rotations since in the last 10 years, let's say. But also it's hard to compare like a Johan-led rotation where he was literally the best pitcher in the world for 3 years versus like, oh, this one, well, they just don't have any weak spots, basically.
Right. Right.
So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But yes, this is our last free show before the opener. We'll probably do a Patreon episode. When do you get back?
I get back tomorrow.
Oh, so we'll probably do a Patreon.
We will do a Patreon before
Monday or Tuesday or something.
Probably,
like that.
I think maybe a pre-opening day mailbag. Something.
Yeah,
like
that's
that.
a good call.
Yeah.
This is our. I'll give one last plea. I don't know, to people who enjoy this show that you're currently listening to, which we call the free show, the weekly show. If you like this, it would be a perfect time to join us, our little kind of private club for midweek Twins talk. On the Patreon side, it's Patreon, patreon.com/Gleeman. We do 1 or 2 episodes there per week that are exclusive to Patreon subscribers. They are commercial free. Once in a while, we drop a curse word. We do mailbag episodes.
Well, depending on how the team's going, we can drop multiple curse words, actually.
Right. True. And they cost $1 per episode, and you're only charged when we put out new episodes. So if we go a full week without putting out a new Patreon, it doesn't cost you a thing.
Right.
So yeah, if you've been on the fence about joining, perfect time to join us. You're starting up right when the season goes. We're, like John said, we'll probably do Monday or Tuesday. We'll do like here's your final questions, your mailbag questions before things get underway. Maybe we'll have a guest on or something like that the next week, and then we'll just be rolling 1 or 2 episodes. So we would love to have you join us. Patreon.com.
We started this episode. We started this podcast, 11 years ago now, right? Or maybe 12 years ago, right? 2011, right? August 2011.
11 and a half years ago.
August. We started it in part because we were frustrated that there wasn't enough deep dive Twins content, audio content out there. Right. And, we tried to do that, but we could only do it once a week, given the limits that we had in advertising. But, when 2019 happened and people were like, hey, we would like more of that. We started on a Patreon, and that's so if you are somebody who is continually frustrated, I can't get enough Twins talk on the radio or something like that, I would suggest maybe you sign up for that Patreon. Patreon.com/Gleeman.
I like how you say back in 2011, we could only do it once a week. What you don't say is I didn't have enough money to do it more than once a week because we would record it
right. Yeah.
At like a bar or a restaurant, and we would eat and drink while we did it. And then at the end of the night, they would say, here's your bill, because that's what happens at a bar or a restaurant when you do those things. And then at the end of the year, John would send me an invoice, and he'd say, well, you owe me $2,100 for this podcast that we're doing. And I was like, wow, that's a horrific business decision. Luckily, a decade later, it turned around. We're almost in the black.
We're almost even.
Yeah. You got to spend money to make money, right, John? We did that for many years.
I guess so.
Okay, so so thanks to everybody for sticking with us during the offseason. This is the part that gets fun. This is the fun part.
Yes, it is. That's right. Hopefully it gets fun.
Well, yeah.
The whole point of this preview is going to be, is it going to be fun? We'll see. We'll see if it's going to be fun.
So last week on this show, we did our annual over-under picks for all of the American League teams, including the Central and the Twins. And so if you haven't listened to that, go listen to that. It's sort of our way of previewing, kind of putting our money where our mouth is on a lot of these teams. And we made over-under picks, including with the Twins. Their over-under actually jumped up from it was 80 at one point this offseason, like at the pre-Correa re-signing, it was 81.5.
I think it was 81.5 going into spring training, Aaron.
Yeah, I mean, it might have been.
Even after the Correa signing. But that Donovan Solano thing changed everything.
Yeah, he moves the needle. Donnie Barrels moves the needle. And then, but by the time I went to Bovada to pull the lines like we always do for the show last week, they were 83.5, and they in fact had tied the White Sox, who had the second place in the AL Central win total at the beginning, and the White Sox lost a win off their total during spring training, basically. Right. Now maybe that's meaningless, but
I'll tell you, in Vegas now it's 84.5.
Really?
Yeah, it's up to 84.5 now. Which, on the one hand, first of all, it makes it harder to bet the over.
Well, wait, I have a theory. I have a theory. You
Yeah.
said you're in the Planet Hollywood.
Well, that's true.
Wait, no, I'm not dissing the Planet Hollywood, but hear me out. That's the sports book you looked at, I'm assuming, to get the line.
That is what people are telling me around here. Yes,
Okay.
that's right. The Caesar Sportsbook.
Now, perhaps someone at Planet Hollywood knew that there were several hundred rubes literally flying in from Minnesota this weekend and thought, let's bump some of those Vikings, Twins, Wolves, and Wild props up a win.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, here's the thing: Planet Hollywood does not operate on its own, right? It's part of the Caesar Sportsbook network.
I like my way
15
better. 15
casinos that are Caesar Sportsbooks on here. They all move up at the same time at 84 and a half.
My way's funnier, John.
But yeah, on the one hand, I'm like, well, that makes it a little bit harder to bet on the over, even though I put my personal number, I think, at 87 last week, right? On the other hand, it is good to see money is moving. Like, we ain't moving the needle. The couple hundred folks that we've got, the couple hundred rooms that are here, we ain't moving the needle. It feels to me like, overall, people who bet a lot of money on sports are taking a look at the Twins and going, that seems like an undervalued property right now.
Yeah.
At 81 and a half, 83 and a half.
Even talking to some like national writers, because what happens every year is like national writers from, some of my favorite writers start doing their previews and they're like, oh, I don't know much about the Twins. So I get a DM or an email or text or whatever. And it's like, tell me about this, tell me about that. And I was talking to one of my favorite writers a couple nights ago, and he was saying like, am I nuts? Or like, should the Twins be the favorite in the Central? And I'm like, I don't want to go that far because I got PTSD from September. But I do think there's a sense, whether you're just focusing on over-under lines that we just talked about, whether you're focusing on, like Fangraphs or Baseball Prospectus's projection systems, which essentially have the Twins and Guardians tied for first place on paper with the White Sox a relatively distant third, or you're just, doing what we're going to do here in a minute and kind of going through the roster and talking about some of the bigger things. I mean, I think this is a pretty good team in a pretty weak division. I also think that was true for 2/3 of last year too. Like, the proof of concept is not that difficult here. Like, we saw they were in first place on September 4th last year. They were tied for first, and they led the division for over, basically 2/3 of the season. So I think it seems weird to watch what we watched in September and then come into the next spring and be like, I'll take the over. They probably could win the division, blah, blah, blah. If you would have told anybody that in July or August, I think they would have been like, well, yeah, they're in first place right now. So I don't know. It's a weird, when the bottom falls out, it's hard to kind of logically view where they're actually at.
Right. I mean, I think we're about to get to this topic, and I think it's a good topic to go into. I'm almost at the point now where I feel like, with the events that we have seen the last week and a half in terms of the lineup and such, that I'm starting to feel like it's a little bit overvalued, that there's a weakness on this team that, we've talked a lot about the depth, and the depth is great, but there's a weakness on this team offensively right now that I'm not sure is recognized overall, because they still see the names out there. But then you start going, what does a lineup actually look like on this team? And then I get a little more nervous when I start taking a look at the actual lineup, which frankly, we might be seeing kind of that lineup today as they play the Braves in the home game. They've got a split squad today, and it looks like they've got almost the starting lineup out there for the home half of that split squad game versus the Braves.
Which we can just read you the lineup. You guys can freak out about that if you want. But yeah, aside from catcher, because Jeffers is starting at catcher,
that's right.
And Vasquez will be the starter. But yeah, well, I think we can get into this right now, because one of the things we wanted to do before we got into like a more formal preview was talk about news and notes, which is all injury based, which it has been for 5 years now. I feel like at the start of every show I go, before we get into our topic, let's talk about the news. Then it's just all injuries. But they've said, and to your point, the sort of depth on paper that we talked all offseason about, and they clearly made a priority and was going to be a strength of the team. They've already had to tap into that, and they're not even out of spring training yet. And I think it's one thing to have it in your head that, well, hey, they got a bunch of more depth this year. They're in good shape this year, especially with the lineup, blah, blah, blah. But that's not a constant. Like that, you don't lock that in for the whole season, and you don't just get good depth for the whole season. And right now they announced 3 different things that clarify some injury situations. It's not the worst case scenario, but I would say it's the second to worst case scenario here. Worst case might be a little much, but what I mean is
we could have included Jose Miranda in that someplace too.
Well, okay, but here's what I mean. So what they announced the past few days is Jorge Polanco will begin the season on the injured list with the same knee problems that ended his season in August last year, so 7 months ago. Bone bruise and tendonitis in his left knee, I think is the official wording on that. Alex Kirilloff will begin the season on the injured list with the 2 wrist surgeries that he had the past 2 years. Just no setback really with him, at least publicly. He's been playing in some minor league games recently. All the quotes from him that I've seen the last week or so have been pretty optimistic. He was optimistic early in camp when I was there too. I think with him, it's more, he just needs a little bit more time, which is not a surprise. When
they say beginning on the IL, are they also saying as a rehab assignment in St. Paul? Or are they saying, no, he's going to be sticking around for extended spring training or what?
That I don't know.
I mean, that to me is that to me is an important piece because you can only be on the rehab situation for so long, right? So if they're doing that with Polanco, well, what is it, 4 weeks?
Well, no, but you don't have to start the rehab. You can start the rehab anytime you want. What I mean is once you start the rehab, a hitter gets 20 days.
Right.
But they don't have to start they can.
No, they don't have to, but that's my point are we going to be seeing Polanco in St. Paul playing, or are we going to be seeing Polanco staying behind in Fort Myers working on stuff on minor league fields or something?
Right. Oh, I'll bet they'll stay behind in Fort Myers, at least for a couple weeks.
Okay.
That's pretty common. Extended spring training is fairly common. I think, I don't know. Yeah. St. Paul starts their schedule, but here's the thing. They continue to put forth optimism with Polanco.
Right. But they've been doing that since August.
Right. I just think at some point, what are we talking about here?
The thought process is he's going to be back in 3 weeks anyway. It's going to be just a short term. Well, yes. Then why isn't he on rehab? Right? You've got 3 weeks of rehab.
Yeah, but they're never going to send him for 20-day rehab. We saw with Buxton, he'd play 2 games and he'd come back. I think it's the same discussion we had about the value of spring training games versus live batting practice and all that stuff.
Yes.
If they think Jorge Polanco is going to come back 3 weeks into the season, which to me would be optimistic given what's happened over the last 7 months, they're going to have him, I'm assuming, in Fort Myers.
2 weeks for Fort Myers and 1 week in St. Paul. Yeah, I can
something like that. Now, it could be a little different if he just wants to be in town for opening day and be with the team or something like that, maybe, sure. Polanco. Right. But yeah, then the third thing that they announced is that Buxton, knock on wood, he's got a couple more games to play here. I wouldn't put anything past him from the injury standpoint, but Buxton will be active on the opening day roster, which is why I said it's not a worst case scenario, because all 3 of them being on the injured list would be the worst case scenario, but he will be limited mostly to designated hitter duties, they said, early in the season, whatever that means, which means opening day is going to be the DH. Right. Which, he played quite a bit of DH last year while he was trying to manage the knee problem. I think they added Michael Taylor as his quote unquote backup specifically because Buxton's going to miss time. We know that. He's never had a healthy season basically other than once. And even if when he's healthy, he's going to sit some games out. He's going to be DH at times. So Taylor was in line for a big role. I certainly think, this is a change in plans, even relative to the beginning of spring, to say, he's going to be the primary DH early on. I'm not saying it's a bad plan. Here's the truth about it. They try something new every year trying to keep him healthy, right? Some years it's just, let's throw him out there and let him play as long as he can. And then he gets hurt. Last year, he had knee problems basically since day one. And they were like, how can we get it so that he can be at 85% 4 or 5 times a week to play? And we saw eventually that, was a mess and he had to shut that down. Now it's like, well, what if we start him out mostly as DH? And then as the season wears on, if he's still able to be the DH, which they want his bat in the lineup, obviously, then we'll start to incorporate more center field action. And then maybe his legs are stronger by that point and all that. Do they know this is going to work? Does the new trainer, Nick Paparesta, is this some big, brilliant scheme that he's been working on for 20 years and he's implement? No, it's They sit
Right.
down and they go, well, what can we try? Like, what can we, how can we keep him healthy? And it's possible there isn't a way to keep him healthy, but
Yeah, I mean, my point on Buxton has always been, or lately, I guess, has been that you either try to be proactive about this, or you're going to end up being reactive about it, right?
sure.
The knees just don't hold up, right? At this point, right now, they just don't hold up, or the body just doesn't hold up. So, I mean, you can be critical about them, maybe not pushing him or not letting him play center field or taking away a lot of his value and let's be clear, it does take away a lot of his value to be moving from center field to DH. Like
Sure.
what it essentially means is I'm getting Michael Taylor as a full-time person on this team. And, it would be the same as if you had Buxton playing center field and Michael Taylor as DH. Well, you don't
Right.
sign Michael Taylor as a DH.
Right.
That's not Michael Taylor. Right?
To your point, what you're basically doing, I first of all, I do think defensively, Buxton is the best center fielder I've ever seen. However, Buxton at less than 100% at
Right.
age, whatever he is, 28, 29, knee problems, who knows where he's at right now, is not the best center fielder in the world. He's probably a very good center fielder. Whereas Michael Taylor is legitimately one of the handful of guys that I think is on Byron Buxton's level in center field. So there's no real drop off defensively. And I think it's possible that a fully healthy Michael Taylor is actually a slightly better center fielder defensively than a compromised Byron Buxton. But to your point, the real trade-off then is you're essentially swapping out whatever you were going to get offensively from a rotating mix of DHs,
Right.
Miranda and Larnick and, whoever it's going to be,
Right.
Gordon and whoever, for Michael Taylor, or if not only Michael Taylor, whoever ends up playing center field. Gordon will play some center field. Gallo might play some center field, whatever it is.
Right.
And that, I mean, Michael Taylor is not going to be anywhere near as good as even a rotating cast of kind of middle of the road designated hitter candidates. But, if the alternative is, do you want Buxton in the lineup as a bat, or do you want Buxton playing 3 times a week as a center fielder or something like that? I mean, I do think that's a debate to be had, and I'm sure they had that debate.
Right.
But it seems logical to me. The problem just is nothing is guaranteed. Like, you can have a great plan for it. You can have a logical plan for it. You can take it slow. You can take it fast. You can do whatever. But he's either going to get hurt or he's not. And most of the time he's going to get hurt. So, I mean, this goes back to the thing we talked about with depth. It's great to look at it in January and say, well, hell, this is pretty good. They got Byron Buxton in center. He's great. We know he's going to miss time, but this time around, when he misses some action, they got Michael Taylor to plug in. Well, that's great. Except now it's March 25th and Michael Taylor's the starting center fielder.
Right.
Byron Buxton's your DH. And,
listen,
you're already into the depth, basically.
Right. It's better than if, Michael Taylor wasn't around. Then we'd be looking at, hey, Gilberto, oh, nope, he's hurt too. And we're back to where we were in 2020 when we're just randomly calling up guys from Double-A or whatever, or Russ Snyder is playing, Russ Snyder is playing center field because
they're trying to trade for Jake Cave from the Phillies now. Is what they're trying to...
Exactly. Where is Jake Cave? We miss Jake Cave so much. That is where we could be right now. So yes, this is better than that, right? But I think we'll get back to this after we talk about our sponsor. But I want to get into where did this trio of bad news leave the lineup for opening day and for the first couple weeks of April and the first couple weeks of May, when they have some heavy hitters on the schedule during April and May. So, but before we talk about that, let's talk about opening day, because an opening day, you're going to get to try out one of the sponsors that have been repeatedly mentioned here, Forgotten Star Brewing. We always talk about Forgotten Star Brewing because they've got this great locale, this absolutely fantastic brewery which is an old World War II production facility right along the train tracks near East River Road and 49th Avenue Northeast. It's in Fridley, but maybe 15-minute drive outside of, maybe not 12-minute drive outside of downtown Minneapolis. It's got this big E and 6 stars on it, and those are historic as well. They won gold medals at the Great American Beer Festival, all kinds of great stuff on tap. But on top, the outdoor space with fire pits, it was just a well done place. And to prove that they're well done. They are also doing a big event for opening day, which Twins Daily is going to be doing. And I think actually Twins Daily the next 3 days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I think we're going to have stories kind of revealing all the different things that are going on there. But it comes down to free beer, Twins watch game. You watch the Twins home opener, and we've got a meat raffle. And
Not the
it's
home opener, the road opener.
I'm sorry, road opener. Yes. Sorry.
The
yes.
opener.
Yes, the 30th from 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock. We will be having, you show up, you get one free beer. That's on Twins Daily and Forgotten Star. We'll take care of you. We've got Groat Beef doing all kinds of prime steak giveaways and so on. We've got Forgotten Star giving away hundreds of dollars worth of gift cards. We've got Soda Stick, who, also a longtime sponsor, handing away prints and such in between the innings. So, what else are you going to be doing on opening day? Let's go.
Yeah. Forgotten Star, 3 to 6 opening day. Hang out with John, hang out with the Twins Daily crew, have some beer at Forgotten Star, and go to twinsdaily.com for more details on that.
Yes.
Or John's been tweeting out the details. Yes. Our other sponsor that we want to talk about is renewed for this season, which I take to mean that several of our nerdy listeners have found how valuable Baseball Reference's StatHead system is, which I found out like 20 years. I've been paying subscriber to this for 20 years or however many years they've had it.
Yep.
It is truly, and I've said this before, like they send us talking points to talk about sponsors. Like, hey, guys, mention this. I don't need any talking points. I've been paying for this product. This is, I'm not being hyperbolic with this, the most essential single thing for me doing my job over the last 2 decades that there is, other than like a laptop computer. The ability to look up almost literally anything,
right.
Any weird thing that pops into my head about a baseball statistic or a baseball fact, or go find a box score from 1982 that I randomly heard some story about. You can get all that on StatHead on Baseball Reference. It is, you will, like, if you've never tried it and you're thinking, why is he going so nuts for it? You will be shocked by the amount of information that is at your fingertips with this thing. And
I think about a week ago, I'd used it too. I was trying to get like which Major League Baseball players, and particularly which Twins, have hit left-handers especially well or especially poorly over the last 3 years. Right. And yeah, here's this. From 2020 to 2022, I ended up using some of these stats on this podcast and in that story. There have been 325 players who have had at least 100 plate appearances versus left-handed, and Max Kepler ranks 385th out of 425 or something like that.
Here's what I always say is all these stats that I tweet out like during games, like somebody will hit 2 homers and I'll say he's the youngest guy to hit 2 homers for the Twins since whatever. That I'm getting that from StatHead.
Yeah, of course. Right, of course.
So you can do that too, and they have a special offer for Gleeman and the Geek listeners. Go to baseballreference.com. You'll see the StatHead product that they offer. Click on that. It's just a whole database that's searchable. It's beautiful.
Or just stathead.com, by the way.
Yeah, stathead.com also works. And the promo code when you go to sign up is just Gleeman, Gleeman, and they'll take $20 off your annual subscription. And like I said, I've been paying full price gladly. I don't want to say this, but like I'd pay double. I'd probably pay triple if they were like, keep it quiet. But stathead.com, or go find StatHead on Baseball Reference, and you too can tweet out.
Can nerd out.
Yeah. Be a top level nerd with us. Okay. So yeah, about the domino effects of the lineup.
Right.
We should say, you mentioned this briefly, but we should say like Miranda looks, I think, not today. He's going to play third base for the first time.
Okay. Right.
I think, or maybe tomorrow. But he's been cleared to throw again, basically. And my assumption is he'll be in the opening day lineup at third base, barring a setback. So that's good news on the injury front, especially because DH is no longer open because Byron Buxton is your DH.
Right. Yeah.
So let's talk about second base, because Polanco is out at second base. He's their longest tenured player. He's been their starting second baseman since he moved from shortstop, when he was their starting shortstop for several years. I feel like Polanco is kind of perpetually underrated just in the grand scheme of the Twins. He was their team MVP unanimously in 2021. If he hadn't got hurt at the end of last year, and last year for him was a down year by his standards, but he
Right.
was still probably one of the 5 most valuable Twins until the point that he stopped playing. I think he's had some ups and downs because of ankle problems and now knee problems, and years ago the half season suspension for PEDs. But just in general, he's been a top 5 hitter at his position, whether that's shortstop or second base, pretty consistently in the American League. Last year, which, like I said, down year, he had a sub 240 batting average, but he drew a ton of walks. He had 16 homers in 100 games. He had a 117 OPS plus last year, which was 3rd best among all American League second basemen. The only ones that were better were the 2 All-Star second basemen, Jose Altuve and Jim Jimenez from Cleveland. So that's what we're dealing with. That's going to be tough to replace. Switch hitter, solid defensively, team leader, all that stuff. They are, though, relatively well equipped, I think, to replace him in the short term. You can do a few things. One is when he went down last year at the end of August, I think he missed the last 37 games, I want to say. Nick Gordon took over as the primary second baseman. And, there's some rough spots to Nick Gordon defensively, even at second base. But, to turn back to that as your primary means of replacing Polanco, I think is pretty logical and straightforward in that you could basically have a platoon at second base where Gordon is what we call the strong side of the platoon, which means he's a left-handed hitter. So he plays against right-handed pitchers, which is generally somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of your opponents, depending on, what the other teams in the division have as their rotation. But let's call it, 70% of the games will be started by a right-handed pitcher. Offensively, if he's the guy we saw in the second half of last year, Nick Gordon, he's not that far off from Polanco as a left-handed bat against right-handed.
I was just saying versus right-handed pitching. That's right. Yeah.
I think
although that's also Polanco's strong side too.
Yes, but I mean, Gordon is a real solid left-handed hitter. Now, to do that well, you could just trot Gordon out there every day at second base and just have him replace Polanco. But there's going to be weak spot in the lineup then against left-handed pitching because Gordon, like most left-handed hitters, is not a good hitter against left-handed pitchers. But that's where some of the depth comes in. So if you wanted to, you platoon Gordon as the left-handed part of the platoon, and then you need to pair him with a right-handed hitter. Well, they have Kyle Farmer, who can play all over the infield and has been playing quite a bit of second base this spring. He crushes lefties. I think he slugged, 530 against them the past couple of years.
Yeah, 880 OPS over the last. This is from StatHead. 880 OPS over the last 3 years by Kyle Farmer versus left-handed pitchers.
Right now, the tricky part there is, and again, you could also just say Kyle Farmer's our everyday second baseman, and I think defensively that would be their best solution. He's the best defender of the group that we're going to talk about, but against righties, similar to Gordon against lefties, he's going to be a number 9 hitter. You're not going to want that. So, but to platoon Gordon against righties and Farmer against lefties, you're going to get some pretty good production there. It's not going to be that far off from Polanco. Now, the value of Polanco is he brings that in the form of one player, obviously.
Right.
The tricky part, though, about Farmer is that he's also the number 1 backup at shortstop and third base. Now, Correa, if healthy, is not going to take many days off, but he'll take the occasional day off. So Farmer will likely play shortstop on those days. And then we talked about Miranda's shoulder. Now, if Miranda is fine, he'll play third base every day probably.
Right.
But early on in the season, my guess is they're going to limit his workload at third base. Maybe he plays some DH, maybe he plays some first base, maybe he takes a day off or two, in which case you're probably going to want Farmer to replace him at third base. So on those days, well, who's the right-handed part of your platoon at second base? Well, they have Donovan Solano, who since 2019 has, this is again from StatHead, has hit 321 against left-handed pitchers, including 300 or higher in all 4 seasons against left-handed pitchers.
Yeah.
So again, an ideal offensively, an ideal platoon partner for Gordon, who's a left-handed hitter. The problem with Solano is he was signed mostly to be a first base DH because he's 35 years old, but he's played 3,000 career innings at second base. Assuming he just hasn't lost multiple steps defensively, which is possible at his age, he'll be fine at second base. He's certainly, familiar with the position. He's experienced at the position. So my assumption,
although maybe not a lot better than Gordon, truth be told.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's,
we'll see.
Yes, I agree. It's going to be I don't think Polanco is a great second baseman, and certainly if he's banged up, he's not a great second baseman.
Right. Yep.
But I think Gordon is a below average second baseman defensively. I think Solano at 35, you can probably count on him not being above average. I think Farmer's a good second baseman. But yeah, it's going to be harder to replace Polanco defensively than it is offensively, I think, with that trio. But they're in relatively good shape. Now, if Polanco then isn't ready in 3 weeks and it stretches into May and June, or, knock on wood here, he needs surgery or it becomes a significant knee problem. I mean, it's already been 7 months. I don't think that's outlandish to speculate about.
Right.
Well, then you go, okay, then are we going to play the whole first half, let's say, with that trio kind of combining to fill second base? But at that point, you're hoping that Ed Julian's
right.
down there with a 450 on base percentage at St. Paul,
right?
Over there in St. Paul, or or Royce Lewis is ready in June or July, or Brooks Lee is hitting 300 with walks and power wherever he gets assigned to begin the season, or Austin Martin has avoided surgery on his elbow and is potentially playing well. All four of those guys have a lot of long-term upside offensively, are essentially major league ready if they can get healthy and produce right away, and are capable of being second baseman. Now, they vary defensively. Julian's on the low end. I would say, Martin is probably on the high end as a second baseman, assuming he's healthy. Lewis, I think, could be a really good second baseman, but we got to see how he is just in general coming back from the knee surgery. But so like in the short term, you got Gordon and Farmer and Solano that you can platoon and mix and match, and you should be able to do pretty well. If Polanco's out longer than, let's say, a month, then Ed Julian enters the mix, in which case you're maybe taking a hit defensively, but you're adding a potential impact bat offensively. And then if it really becomes an issue, like for the whole first half into the second half, or you're at the point where you're starting to say, well, unfortunately, Polanco's $10 million option for next season maybe isn't looking so good.
Right.
Then you start to go, well, maybe Royce Lewis is your long-term second baseman. Maybe Brooks Lee, maybe, Austin Martin, maybe Julian improves a little bit defensively. So, I mean, I can't imagine you're losing a key player, but I can't imagine a team being like better equipped.
That's true.
Term, in the intermediate term, and in the longer term to actually replace their second baseman.
I mean, I agree with you on that. The question becomes, I'll react to that two ways that worry me. The first is, okay, now we've already used up our depth. Right. Like if Miranda, you already mentioned, if Miranda can't play third base or his shoulder acts up again, what do we do? If Correa has to miss 2 weeks because of tendonitis or something, what are we doing? Kyle Farmer's moving over there, right? Not to mention, these guys were all options to step in and, have a good right-handed bat like Kyle Farmer versus left-handed pitchers at DH or something. Now we don't have, that extra level of depth to play in either of those two, first base or DH position that we were talking about. The second is this, and this is like, here's what worries me a little bit from a, rather than kind of get down into the details, here's what worries me. There were 4 guys offensively I trusted last year in that lineup, right? Luis Arraez, he's gone. Correa looks good. Polanco, he's gone. He's missing, right? And Buxton, he's there, but now he's playing DH. He's not center field, which means I'm going to see a whole lot more Michael Taylor in this offense, right? If I'm trying to figure out how I'm getting back to 4 really good guys in the middle, or 4 guys I kind of trust through the heart of that lineup, well, I'm looking, okay, let's hope Gallo bounces back because he's going to be playing a lot of first base, right? Let's hope Kepler bounces back. Let's hope Miranda takes yet another step forward, has another big season step forward the way he has the last 2 years. I'm actually really optimistic about that one, right? Larnick, can he stay healthy and hit the way we kind of hoped? Kirilloff, can he get healthy? Suddenly, all of these questions that were, kind of backup questions, like listen, if Gallo doesn't work out, we can cut him midway through the season. We don't need, he's on a 1-year contract. Nope. We need Gallo. We need somebody in there to step forward and take over the middle of the, I'm not so much worried about who's handling things in the field and whether or not they can also be productive offensively. I'm just kind of looking at where's the offensive peak on this lineup right now.
Right.
And I see I don't see any valleys. I don't see as many valleys as we saw certainly like last September when it was valley, 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 you know, but I don't see the peaks either. And that's why when even a couple weeks ago when we said of the three things I'm worried about with this team, rotation, bullpen, lineup, which one am I most worried about? I think I'm still most worried about the lineup. I think I'm more worried about the lineup than I am about the bullpen at this point.
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, if they hadn't assembled the additional depth of Farmer and Solano and Michael Taylor,
right,
they'd already be a mess right now.
Right.
Here we go again. So that's good, but now you're you don't have depth anymore. You've used it.
Right.
You've used the depth already to just get back to a place where you're just kind of normal.
I'm already to the backup level.
Right.
I'm almost to the backup level.
Yeah. Right. I think that I have a little bit of optimism in that they do have guys like Julian, guys like Wallner, and then mid-season guys like Royce Lewis or Brooks Lee or whoever who are ready to take on big roles if needed, which is different from last year. But yeah, I completely agree. And I would say, weirdly, because we spent 20 years watching a Twins team that was just all lefties, the lineup.
Right.
Going back to the Jock Jones, Minkiewicz, Koski days, and then obviously Mauer, Morneau, all the Denard Span, everybody. They're really short on lefties because Kirilloff, and obviously Polanco's a switch hitter, but primarily a lefty. Kirilloff and Polanco, you also, like you pointed out, are removing Luis Arraez, who's like a career 330 hitter against righties as a lefty.
Correct.
You're counting on Gallo, you're counting on Kepler, and you're counting on Larnach. I mean, I think the Kirilloff, we talked about how they'll likely replace or how they could replace Polanco at second base. How will they replace Kirilloff? Well, I would kind of argue they're not replacing him. Like he was never really fully, but penciled in at first base DH. I just think it's going to be Larnach, but I think it's going to be Larnach in left field or at DH, and then some Gallo or a lot of Gallo initially at first base. But then again, you need Larnach to be healthy. I'm a believer in Larnach. Like
I am too.
Last week, or I guess earlier this week, I did like a 5 picks to click for the Twins. And basically I limited myself to players who have never had 2 wins above replacement in a season and are not projected to have 2 wins above replacement this season by either Fangraphs or Baseball Prospectus. And so I named 5, and one was Nick Gordon, who we've just talked about.
Sure.
And the other hitter I named was Larnach. Like I 100% believe that if he can stay healthy, he's going to be, kind of a prototypical number 5 hitter, 260, 20 something homers, bunch of walks. I think he's a better defender and base runner than people give him credit for because of his size. But Gallo, I'm not super optimistic about. I don't think it's impossible that he gets back to where he was in 2021 and previously for the Rangers, in which case, yeah, he's a perfectly solid middle of the order, walks and power guy. And, Kepler, I'm also pretty skeptical about, but there's some optimism because of the shift limitations and he's looked stronger, although now he's had some hip problems in camp. So all of a sudden you need like probably 2 of those 3 to produce early on. Otherwise, their 3 best hitters are righties. I mean, their 3 best hitters right now are Correa, Buxton, and Miranda.
Right.
And that's not the end of the world. I mean, that's great. That's could be your 2, 3, 4. Your 2, 4, 5. I mean, whatever.
Although that's putting a fair amount of Miranda on a second. I mean, that's the one thing that worries me a little bit. But I actually agree with you. Miranda is one of my clicks to pick. There's picks to click, clicks to pick. One of my, I feel like he's headed for a breakthrough season, or I'm hopeful that he's heading for a breakthrough season. I think there's a lot of, you get the sense throughout that clubhouse that there's a lot of optimism about Jose Miranda this year.
Yeah, I mean, Jose Miranda can hit. Like I'm very convinced of that. He's going to hit. I'm less convinced he's going to be a good third baseman. I'm less convinced, is he going to have huge upside beyond what we saw kind of in the middle of last year, but he doesn't need to. I mean, if he just hits like he did from mid-May through the beginning of September before he just kind of wore down, that's, 275, 25 homers, bunch of doubles, doesn't strike out much. I mean, that's a really good hitter. I mean, but yeah, I agree with you. Like, I think you can't, if Taylor's playing most days and you're platooning at second base and you got either Vasquez or Jeffers at catcher, obviously, there's going to be 2 or 3 spots in this lineup where you're like, I don't know what we're getting from this. Maybe we get decent production from that platoon at second base. Maybe Vasquez and Jeffers, have a pretty good numbers, at least relative to the catching position, I think is possible. Maybe Larnach really, grabs hold of a job and never gives it back and all that. But there are definitely question marks that they had hoped not to have this early on.
This looks much more like a lineup full of, if the answers are right, it's an above average offense. If the answers are wrong, it's a below average offense. And if we kind of break even, we're kind of in the middle there.
Yeah. I mean, I think they'll be above average. They were above average last year, basically, right? I'm pretty sure they were. September skews everything last year.
Right. Yeah, I know.
But I mean, I think they're an above average lineup. I just question, is there the upside to be a top 5 lineup or a top 3 lineup or something like that? Which, I don't know about that. Now, if 3 months from now, Kirilloff's back and Polanco's back and Ed Julian's the DH, and you can
and keeping Buxton in the DH has been healthy, has made him healthier, right? Yeah.
The other question then is, so I'm assuming Larnach will definitely. Larnach's going to be on the opening day roster. He's essentially replacing Kirilloff, which is fine. Lefty bats, they've been kind of side by side coming up through the system for years. In terms of who replaces Polanco, like we talked about, who will replace him in the lineup and at second base, but who replaces, literally takes his roster spot, it's going to have to be somebody from the weird pile. It's going to have to be somebody that
it's not a 40-man roster guy, right?
Right.
It's somebody off of the 40-man roster.
I would guess, if I had to put money on it right now, which what a strange thing to have to put money on. I would do it though.
Sure. I would too.
But if you can come up with a line, I'll bet on it.
I've been in Vegas for 4 days. We just turn to the person next to us and say, "I've got 50."
Yeah. I think it'll be Willie Castro, is my guess.
Yeah.
Because I
saw Soto got sent down yesterday. I was wondering if he was still in the play.
Not because
you think Castro over somebody like Garlick.
Well, that was the other one is Garlick. I think Willie Castro gives them a lot more defensive flexibility. He can play literally anywhere. He's not a good shortstop, but he can play third, he can play second, he can play all the outfield spots. He's had a really good spring for whatever that's worth. I know neither of us really put too much emphasis on spring performance, but he's had a really good spring. He's a experienced major leaguer. I think he's played parts of 4 seasons in the majors with the Tigers. The Twins have seen a lot of them. I'm not real optimistic that he's going to have a breakthrough. I think he's kind of a replacement level utility man, basically. But that's kind of what they need right now. If Farmer's playing second and Gordon's playing second and they got Larnach in left and Gallo at first, they just need somebody who can provide backup coverage at 5 spots or 6 spots. Now, you could also make the argument for Garlick, except looking at their schedule, I don't know how many lefties they're even going to face initially early on. And you're only going to use Garlick as a left fielder or DH against lefties, which is a role that they haven't really filled. But we just talked about how they have a bunch of righties in the lineup. I'm not as worried about that relative to, having a backup third baseman, a backup. So, but here's another possibility that I'll leave out there. They could just claim somebody off waivers as teams are making last minute moves here. If literally all their, because Castro's not on the 40-man roster. So to add him to the opening day roster would require a 40-man roster spot. Well, anybody they claim off waivers is the same thing. So you're going to be looking at the waiver wire over the next 96 hours as teams are making their last minute cuts and going through the same debates that the Twins are going through right now of who's our 13th position player, if some solid backup outfielder or some, good hitting first baseman or whatever it is gets put on waivers or released or opts out of their minor league contract, which happens, I could see the Twins saying, all right, let's just put him on the roster. He's our 26th guy. But I would say Willie Castro is kind of the leader in the clubhouse, with Garlick being the other obvious possibility there.
Yeah. I mean, I think personally, it feels to me like they've got enough backups and enough infield spots. But yeah, Castro is somebody who definitely received a lot of playing time early. He has been the one who has continued to sort of stick around and make his way into lineups on a regular basis. He's also got he's got some upside. I mean, he is 6 years old only, something like that.
He's a young veteran.
Well, and this was supposed to be his first year of arbitration when Tigers cut him loose. So they've got him under team control for 3 years. There's reasons to invest in Castro outside of just because you want another infielder on the roster, right? Like there's reasons to continue to give him at bats and opportunities and make him feel like part of the organization and so on, and give him at bats. So
I think Castro is one of those guys. I think we've talked about this with a few players over the years, where if there were no stats, you would think he was much better. Because you look at him and you go, all right, this guy's pretty fast. He's a pretty good athlete. He can drive the ball occasionally. He doesn't strike out a ton. He can play anywhere defensively. But then you look at the end of the year and it's like, oh, he's got a 286 on base percentage and a 375 slug. And it's like, what are we really talking about here? But when they signed him, I think they viewed him as kind of a priority minor league signing. And what that means is like, we're signing him probably for AAA, but he's one of those guys at the front of the minor league signing line, I think, just because of his experience in the majors with the Tigers. So that's where they're at from a, I don't know, position player side, which I do agree with you that like, it seems crazy to say, but I have more confidence in the rotation right now.
Oh, that's my do. Yeah, there's no question I have more confidence in the rotation. The question is whether or not I have more confidence in the bullpen.
Yeah, I do. I feel like you are more confident in the bullpen than me.
Probably.
I don't think it's like a massive weakness, like oh my God, how can they enter the season like this?
Right.
And again, maybe this is just the PTSD from last year.
Yeah.
The bullpen was, aside from Duran, just a mess for so much of last season. But I continue to be like, they're one, to me, right-handed reliever short. I like their lefties. I mean, I like Caleb Theobar's been great. I'm a huge Giovanni Moran fan, believer. And if Danny Coulomb is the last reliever as a lefty, he's a perfectly solid middle reliever who's pitched well when he's been healthy with the Twins. That's a good trio of lefties, all of whom can get righties out if you want them to. You don't have to kind of pigeonhole them into matchup-based roles. From the right side, you're asking a lot of Griffin Jacks, which he was one of my picks to click. He was my number one pick to click. I think Griffin Jacks.
He's been looking good this spring, boy.
Yes. I mean, he was really good last year.
Right.
I look at the jump he made in terms of velocity and raw stuff and strikeout rate and all that in his first year as a reliever. I mean, he didn't even resemble the guy that we saw the year before or the guy who was a marginal starter prospect previous to that. And he's thrown even harder now. I had a good conversation with him one of my last days there where he's added a cutter that he likes and he feels even more confident with velocity and all that stuff. I just think his stuff has gotten to the point now where you go, I mean, guy throws 96 with a great slider. Like, what are we? And I just think he's a very smart guy who kind of embraces tweaking stuff, pitch mix wise. And I just think, he's got the military background and all that stuff that I just think he's the one who can most change my view of this bullpen overall, because, Duran obviously I think is amazing. And I would actually bet on him ending up as more of a traditional closer this year. I think they're just going to be, it's going to be real tempting to just say, screw it. Let's just have him close games.
Yeah, it is going to be
in
real
which
tempting.
case,
you're right.
Jax as your eighth inning guy can make or break a lot. Although I do think they're going to give Jorge Lopez a chance, but I'm pretty skeptical of him too. Obviously Pagan, I'm no big fan of. I think Alcala being healthy could have a pretty huge impact on that, obviously. Yeah. And, if Moran is as good as I think he's capable of being, like if he gets to his 80th percentile or 90th percentile outcome, I mean, he could be a seventh or eighth inning guy too. So, I mean, there's upside in this bullpen.
Right.
I just wonder, especially early on in the year, unless Lopez is really good, Jorge Lopez is really good right away, I think there's going to be a couple of weak spots that you're really counting on Duran just doing some real heavy lifting again. And maybe he can. He did it all last year. Right. But yeah, the bullpen to me is the biggest question mark. I mean, health is the biggest question mark at this point with everything. But should we talk about our sponsor? Our last couple sponsors, and then we'll go. I got some kind of season preview-y questions.
I will give you it is, I know what we got snow coming on Thursday back in Minnesota. Is that what I saw for the opening day? That doesn't mean you can't start looking ahead to spring. And one of our favorite sponsors for spring as it comes around is Sunday, where they just absolutely take care of the biggest pain in the butt aspects of keeping a lawn. Every year I say, I'm going to have a better lawn this year. And then every year I get to the point where I've got to go and like get the buy the fertilizer, and I've got to go get the spreader I don't have my own spreader in the garage, so I've got to go and rent that from the hardware store. And am I setting the dial just right, or am I over nitrogening I don't know any of that stuff. How would I know that stuff? Why do I have to think about it once a year? And if I don't do it, well, then in July, I'm like, why didn't you do that? You dummy. You should have gone and done that. Well, how about we just take care of all of that? We don't have to deal with any of it. All you do is you just go to Sunday or Get Sunday, right? Is it getsunday.com?
Yes, getsunday.com
right.
/Gleeman20. And you enter in your address and they will give you a customized plan specific to your lawn in terms of the size of the lot, in terms of the type of soil, the type of bugs that are found in the area. Like they'll customize it fully to you so that all you have to do basically is screw it onto your hose.
Right.
And you're ready to go. And it'll do better than you would have ever done on your own.
Just spray your lawn with the water. It's awesome. And do it now. And that way, when that first really nice weekend shows up, and probably, I'm guessing May at this point, it's not happening in March, maybe sometime in April, right? You're just ready to go. You don't have to panic. You don't have to try and get them to rush send it to you. It's just sitting in the garage. It's just sitting there waiting for you.
So here's the deal that they're offering, Gleeman and the Geek listeners. You go to Get Sunday like the day of the week, SUNDAY, getsunday.com /Gleeman. And the reason it's /Gleeman20. So getsunday.com /Gleeman20. And the reason it's Gleeman20 is because you get 20% off. Their full season plans start at just $109, and you can get 20% off when you go to getsunday.com /Gleeman20. And then our last sponsor for the day is one of our longest time sponsors, Harry's Razors. One
of my favorite things that I used to do in Vegas is I would go someplace over here and get the razor shave. I would go to a barber and get a razor shave because I could not believe how smooth my face could be when it had that kind of. I haven't done it in 3 years, and the reason I haven't done it is because of Harry's razors. It turns out when you shave both with the grain and then again with against the grain, and you're not afraid to shave against the grain because you know you've always got a sharp razor, it's a game changer in terms of how smooth your face ends up. Ask Chrissy. It is a game changer in how smooth my face has ended up.
The beauty of Harry's is you don't have to go to a store and talk someone into unlocking some case to get it for you.
Right.
They'll ship it. They send it right to your door. It's neatly packaged. I always say it makes me feel like Don Draper when I open the kit, and it's like real fancy looking nice. The quality of the razor is as good or even higher than typical that you're going to find. The price point is much less expensive because they've kind of cut out the middleman. And if you're someone who like uses the same crusty old razor for like 3 years just because you're too lazy, like I am, to go get fresh ones, this is super easy. Like there's no need. Once the razor starts to go bad, they'll ship you a new one, all that. And they're offering what they call the Truman Shave Trial Set, which is a $15 value. And our listeners can get it $3. They just go to Harry's, HARRYS, Harry's.com /Gleeman. You get the 5-blade German engineered razor. You get with the weighted handle, foaming shave gel, and you get the travel cover. Plus, you can schedule out replacement blade delivery whenever you need them. Refills are as low as $2. You just go to Harry's.com /Gleeman, $3 for what is a $15 trial set to give it a try. Okay. Let's see. I had one other
bullpen note. Do we got I noticed they sent Dobnik down.
Yeah.
So he's not in the. Do we still think that we're going to get a long reliever, or are you still dubious about whether or not we're going to see that? I mean, it's got to be Sands at this point, right? He's the only one left in camp that we thought was a real candidate to be the. I mean, is Hoffman still in camp?
Yeah, it could be Hoffman. I still think Danny Coulombe has a pretty good chance to make the bullpen, not as a long reliever, just in general.
Sure.
Yeah, it's a little bit. I don't know. I feel like we've spent in
way too much time
amount of time talking about
the 26th spot on the roster. Right?
The last reliever, particularly because the Twins have shown, and many teams take this approach. It's not to say it's not locked in that last bullpen. Like they're going to use somebody for 2 innings and then send them down and call somebody else up. But yeah, I would say that's the group that's in the mix. I guess we talked about Pablo Lopez. I don't know. We talked plenty about the WBC. Obviously, it ended on the highest of high notes. The Trout Otani for the
Showdown.
for the whole damn thing was pretty great. Would have been better with like a runner on second.
Yeah.
But that was, if you would have said right up an ending for the WBC, Otani throwing 101, and then an 87-mile-an-hour slider and strike out Mike Trout as the game-tying run in the bottom of the ninth.
With the full count, 3-2 pitch.
Yeah, true. Top of the ninth, I should say. Yeah. I mean, that was an incredible drama. I think that tournament, it was good all the way through, but it ramped up at the end. I thought was awesome. Like, there's still people who are like, I don't care and all that stuff. But, if you watched it, I'll bet you enjoyed it. And, I think they said already, definitely coming back in 2026. You got guys like Trout saying, I'm in, and I'm going to try to recruit some of our star pitchers to be in it, all that stuff. So, yeah, I know the WBC was a lot of fun. A lot of Twins like Pablo Lopez, which got me started on this topic again, were involved. Ed Julian played great for Canada. They had half the Puerto Rican team. It was great. I don't know. I guess we could finish on just some like bigger picture, some of which we've already discussed just by way of news and notes and stuff, but season previewy type of things, since this is our last chance to pontificate before it becomes a moving target. You know what I mean? This is our last chance to it sits still while this sits still. This is our last chance to do it.
Okay.
So I can just run down some of these and we can, I don't know, banter about these. We talked a little bit about the lineup, the young talent coming in, Lee, Lewis, Julian, Wallner, Martin, some other guys.
Right.
Larnick is probably still in that group. Kirilloff, if he's healthy, is still in that group. For that matter, Miranda is still kind of in that group. I think that's what hopefully differentiates this core group from last year's core group, which is when the injuries hit last year. It was Mark Contreras and Caleb Hamilton and guys like that. I think if and when more injuries hit now, first of all, they've got guys like Farmer and Taylor to fill in, which is an upgrade over last year. But then if more come, to be able to call up Ed Julian, ready or not, and be like, all right, now you're a left-handed bat in this lineup at second or first or DH or whatever it is. Not many teams have guys like that waiting in the wings. I mean, we kind of took it for granted during much of the Gardy era that there was always these guys, one or two guys kind of waiting in the wings to step up. And that was one of the biggest drivers of their consistency, their success during that era.
For sure.
Which is
especially I think early in, like early on, like 2001 to 2005, 2006. I used to say AL Central is almost always a war of attrition. That team players do get hurt, and the question is, do you have the backups and the prospects and the role players that come in and don't have to dominate, they don't have to become stars, but they have to produce in the role that they are given. And last year, I felt like that was one of the keys to the Twins hanging around as long as they did through August until it just became too much.
Right.
If I take a look at this year's team, what I worry about is that we're already looking at, what happens if the backup gets hurt? What happens if another starting player gets hurt? We're already sort of at that point where we're starting to look at backups to the backups, and it's not yet March or 30th yet. Like, it's not yet opening day.
Yeah.
But I do feel strong. Like you said, you got enough other prospects kind of sitting out there. We haven't mentioned Matt Wallner. Also another left-handed bat that could end up filling in out there. They do have some options, and we haven't really dove into all the different pitching options they have sitting in the minor leagues right now, or sitting in St. Paul. So even if the injuries continue to be an issue, I do feel like this team has enough depth to maybe outlast some of the other teams that are.
Yeah.
If the other teams aren't the second least hurt team in Major League Baseball, some of that's going to catch up with them.
Yeah, and I mean the danger with prospects is, and we've seen this over the years, you say to yourself, well, if a bunch of guys get hurt, they'll just call up Julian. Well, if Julian gets called up and hits 180 for a month,
right,
that doesn't really help anything. The hope with guys like Farmer and Taylor and that type of and Solano is that their floor is higher
Right.
than a totally unproven young player, because sometimes
Right.
totally unproven young players, even if they are going to go on and become very good players, their initial taste of the majors,
Sure.
there is really no floor. Like once in a while, you'll just see somebody go like 2 for 30, and you'll just be like, "This guy's unplayable right now."
Well, take
We'll
a look
check
at
back.
Take a look at Miranda last year.
Right,
I mean,
exactly.
Miranda's first month and a half, he was brutal.
Yeah.
And maybe a month and a half, but maybe it was a month and a half. And suddenly he caught it. He figured it out. And then he tore it up for a while. So, and Larnack, Larnack had happened to. Kirilov had happened to. Like,
right. And that's the purpose of the veteran depth, as opposed to just turning. The purpose is twofold. One is if you turn first to the veteran depth and then to the young depth, you have 3 layers of depth instead of just 2.
Right.
Like if Kirilov and Polanco were beginning the year on the injury list and it was already Julian and Wallner replacing them, which it could very well be, like just positionally, then you go, well, who's the next guy? Like, what if someone gets hurt next week? Who are they down to? And then it's Willie Castro playing, regularly or something like that. But then the other benefit is, and this isn't always true, I mean, veteran guys are capable of hitting 150 for a month too.
Absolutely,
but the conventional wisdom, at least, or the hope at least, is there's a more established level of production, even on the low side, for a guy like Kyle Farmer or a guy like Michael Taylor versus even a good prospect. A good prospect, even getting their feet wet, sometimes they just sink. Like sometimes,
right.
And so I do think they're in a relatively strong position there. Not that they have the greatest farm system, but just that the overwhelming majority of their top 10 prospects are double A or higher, or half of them have already gotten a little bit cup of coffee in the majors. The other question that I feel like they talked about early in camp, I know Dan Hayes and I wrote an article about this, is the idea of improved defense, but then also base running.
Yeah.
And the problem, well, I guess you can take these separately, but the problem with the defense is, well, now Buxton's a DH. Okay. Taylor's your center fielder. There isn't a drop off there. But we were kind of thinking, well, if you have Buxton in center against a lefty, you might have Taylor in left or right.
Right.
In which case you got elite defense. Well, now you have Taylor in center, Buxton's at DH, Gallo, who's a 2-time Gold Glove corner outfielder, is going to be at first base probably quite a bit. Now they think he's going to be really good at first base too, but I don't think he might not win a Gold Glove there. Right. And then you got Larnack, who's a good defender, but he's not
a bad defender. Right.
And infield wise, Miranda I don't think is going to be a huge strength at third. I think Correa is a big strength at shortstop, but then we were just talking about now they got Gordon possibly being the primary second baseman, which is going to be below average probably.
At least the strong side of the platoon, yeah.
Right. And then so catcher is going to be vastly improved because Christian Vasquez is a better thrower than Ryan Jeffers. I think the outfield is going to be really good, whether it's Taylor or Buxton in center, because Kepler's a really good right fielder. Gallo, when he's in left field or right field, is very good. Larnack is pretty solid too. But the infield, I don't think has the potential, especially without Polanco, to be really good. I think that has the potential to be okay if Miranda is better than I anticipate. The outfield will be good. Catcher will be good. I don't view this as a potentially elite defense like I did a month ago. Maybe it could be a strength of the team, but I don't know that their defense was that big of an issue last year. Even their defense wasn't great, but it wasn't a big issue for them last year, I don't think.
At the beginning of camp, there was so much emphasis by Rocco to emphasize the non-power game of baseball, right? The to get away from sort of the Bomba squad mentality that was going on, whether it was talking about pitching or defense or base running, right? And on the one hand, I took that as, okay, well, that's an emphasis in part because of the rule changes that are going on, right? I think actually there's 2 things. I thought it was the rule changes, but I also thought they just recognize that the ball ain't going to be juiced. I don't know exactly what the ball is going to be like this year. We don't know where it's going to end up. I'm hoping it's not quite as crazy as last year, but the thought process is we've got to be able to win even if the ball isn't juiced, right? That we have to be able to, and I agree with that. But my question was sort of can this team really do that? Like, can this team
Right.
be a pitching and defense and base running team? I think you and I might have talked about it. Maybe we talked about it on a podcast, or maybe we talked about it just at spring training. Like, is that really the makeup of this team? I'll just add a third part to that because I also, I thought about the base. Right about 3 weeks late after camp started, I asked Michael Taylor a little bit like, how's the thought process about stealing some more bases this year going? Like, he's like, well, I haven't tried it yet, so I don't think it's going real great.
Right.
Like, oh yeah,
Well,
okay.
And
so I just want to wonder how much of that was sort of first week of camp. I want to set a tone, and that tone is going to be that we're not just going to sit back and hit home runs. So we're going to emphasize all of the other stuff just to kind of set that tone for the team. But there's a difference between setting a tone like that and actually going out and continually re-emphasizing that and building your identity around that. And I don't think this team is ready to build their identity around that.
I think it is valuable to set a tone like that. And you can make some changes in approach, whether it's base running, whether it's defense.
Sure.
I mean, I do think the pitching's going to be better.
Right.
The defense should be good and better.
Yep.
But I think base running is a prime example of what we're kind of talking about, which is it's great to say we sucked at base running last year. We're not going to suck this year.
Yeah, we've sucked several years in a row, really.
Well, right. But they were awful last year.
Right.
We brought in Paul Molitor as our base running coach. We, got rid of Gary Sanchez and Gio Urshela, who were their two slowest players. We added Michael Taylor. We're going to do base running drills more than we ever did before every day early in camp and all that stuff. And I think that can all have an impact. But, it's easier said than done. And if you look at this roster, the 13 position players who are likely to make the team, or even Kirilloff and Polanco, if you want to include them as, being part of the mix within a few weeks, let's say, they're not a fast team.
No, they're not. No.
The only actually above average speed hitter or position player that they added this entire offseason is Taylor.
Right.
And, Taylor could steal 15, 20 bases. He's a good runner. He's fast. He's a smart runner.
I don't think he can, by the way, but go ahead.
I mean,
he's 34, 35 years old, right?
No.
33?
31?
Is he that young? Okay. I'm wrong.
Okay. He is 31. 32 tomorrow.
Okay. All right.
So he's close. He's getting close.
Good enough.
If he has 3 more birthdays next week, 32 tomorrow, 33 on Monday, then he'll be
all right.
I'll take the over on 10 steals for him. But you go up and down this lineup, the catcher spot, they're not fast. Vasquez and Jeffers, neither of them are fast. Kirilloff, not fast. Polanco's out of there, and when he comes back, he's above average speed. But now we're talking about a guy who's had ankle problems.
He's not going to be stealing. No.
Right. Carlos Correa is one of the slowest shortstops you will ever find. He's, average-ish speed, but he never steals bases.
Yeah, he says outright in spring training, I will not be stealing any bases this year. So
right. Miranda, very slow and not a good base runner. Obviously Buxton is a great base runner. He's one of the fastest guys. He's an incredible base stealer, has literally the highest stolen base percentage in the history of baseball. When he's healthy, he going first to third, going first to home. On singles sometimes. I mean, he's incredible. But, he barely runs steals anymore because they've decided it's not worth the risk. And, we saw last year, if his knee's problematic, he's fast, but he's not the fastest anymore. Solano is 35 and slow. Kyle Farmer is, average-ish speed at best. Nick Gordon's pretty fast, not a great base runner, I would say.
No.
And then,
I think he's the one guy on the team who views that as part of his identity, though.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? Right. I mean, I think
the two other, the corner guys, Gallo and Kepler, I think are kind of similar in that neither of them are fast, but they're both good base runners. They're both aggressive when you want them to be aggressive. Gallo has a really good reputation as a base runner, although I will also point out that his sprint speeds have tumbled quite a bit over the last 3 years, which often happens in the late 20s for players. But I mean, we just went through basically the whole group here. Larnick, reasonably fast, but not a burner or anything. We just went through 15, 18 guys. Those are the position players you're going to see early on in the season. There's maybe 2 or 3 you would say are fast. Buxton, Taylor, Gordon, maybe. but the majority of those guys are average at best, and there's 3 or 4 of them who are just downright slow. Plus the catching duo is always going to be downright slow, and I just wonder, like, it's great to emphasize it. Just removing Gilberto Celestino from the mix is going to create far fewer head slapping mistakes on that front, so that'll help.
Yeah, fair,
but I mean, this is.
But Arise was a smart base runner.
Yeah, Arise was a good base runner, not super fast, but a good base runner. I look at this team and I go, it'll be better than it was last year as base running. I mean, it can't be as bad, but I don't see that being a strength. I just don't. And my worry with them is if they really try to push the aggression on the bases, and I don't necessarily even mean steals. I mean, they'll steal more often, but if they really try to push the aggression, what you're going to get is a lot of dudes thrown out at home, a lot of dudes thrown out at third, and then a lot of post games like, hey, that's our identity. We're going to push the envelope. We're going to try to do this. So, yeah, I don't know. I look at this team and it's like, you see this in the NBA sometimes where a coach will be like, a new coach will take over and he'll be like, we're going to play a hard-nosed, tough brand of basketball. We're going to defend and we're going to rebound. And, you're not going to get to and then you look at the roster and you're like, who on this roster is going to do that? This ain't the bad boy Pistons. Like, what are we talking about? And so that's kind of how I see the Twins right now, is like, it'll be a better base running team, but this is not a fast team by any means. So
I take a look at it. Listen, it's one thing to say that's going to be, we want to emphasize that in spring training. Sooner or later, you have to have players that identify themselves as that kind of a player. They don't have a lot of that kind of players out there. I would say, as far as pitching and defense and base running goes, what I would suggest, sort of the components of small ball, right? This seems like this. I mean, I would look at this as good pitching. What they're really hoping for is very good pitching, competent defense, like maybe a little better than competent defense. You're good. Make the plays you're supposed to make, and make them, even if the other team is being particularly aggressive. Continue making those plays. Let the other team run it themselves into outs or steal themselves into outs, something like that. And from a base running standpoint, it's take the extra base when it's there. Don't screw up when they are giving you something.
Right.
But this team isn't going to be forcing other teams into errors and working themselves around the bases. That's not going to happen with this team.
No, I agree. Let's see. We talked a little bit about the rotation, just to kind of put a bow on that. It's deeper. It's not just though competent depth. I think it's really high quality depth. I mean, to me, what we often talk about as rotation depth is more guys like Dylan Bundy, who, this is a veteran guy. He'll give you a league average ERA. He won't blow up a lot. That's what the Twins have often viewed as rotation depth, going back to the Livan Hernandez, Ramon Ortiz, Sidney Ponson. They often targeted guys like that. And I still recently, J Happ, Matt Shoemaker, Chris Archer, Dylan Bundy. That's kind of what we've come to regard as rotation depth, which is like semi-competent fifth starters who have experience. This year's group is not that. Like, I think they have depth in that they have 6 or 7 good starters.
Right.
But I mean, who's their worst starter? Their worst starter right now might be Maeda, coming back from surgery, who's a former runner-up for the Cy Young, and pre-surgery was one of their best starters. Ober, I think, has a chance to be a mid-rotation starter or better. Joe Ryan's already out at that level. Sonny Gray and Pablo Lopez, I say, are solid number 2 starters. Mahle, if healthy, could be the best pitcher in the bunch. I'm just pretty skeptical about that still. But the thing I think you're going to see twofold is, if an injury strikes, they still have Ober, they still have Louis Varland, they still have Simeon Woods Richardson. They have some guys to fill in before you get to the Chichi Gonzalez call-up type of guys. But then beyond that, start to start, the biggest complaint of last year, it was constant, like to the point that it was like, Jack Nicholson in The Shining, just writing all work and no play, Jack
right,
boy, is why can't the starters go deeper in starts? And it got to the point where people were like, why trade for Pablo Lopez if Rocco is just going to pull him in the 3rd inning? And it's like, you guys got that backwards. Like, I'm not saying it's going to be Tom Kelly managing Jack Morris in the World Series or anything, but the reason they pulled starters early is because so many of their starts were made by Archer and Bundy and Devin Smeltzer and all these guys. And they were pulling them early because they felt like that was their best chance and it allowed them to avoid inevitable blowups by those same starters if they were pressed into a third or fourth time through a lineup. Well, this group was just much different. I mean, might they pull Sonny Gray earlier than Sonny Gray would like? Yeah, probably.
Right.
He's been vocal about that. But to me, the goal is 6 to 7 innings in a good start in the year 2023 in Major League Baseball. And people might hate that, but that's how all teams pretty much view it. And I think the Twins are not dissimilar from that if they have the horses. And I think this year they have the horses. And I think people are going to hopefully see a lot more 6 and 7 inning starts instead of 4 or 5 inning starts. And they're going to be like, oh, Rocco learned from last year. No, Rocco now has Pablo Lopez instead of Devin Smeltzer. Rocco now has, Bailey Ober as his 6th starter instead of, I don't even know who the hell they're guys they called up last year. And so I think that's going to be one of the bigger differences. And my hope is, I'm like we talked about, I'm a little more skeptical than you about the bullpen. Well, the bullpen hopefully will not be as needed. They will not have to carry as much weight and take on literally as many innings if Pablo Lopez is going 6+ innings to start, and Joe Ryan is going 6+ a start, and Sonny Gray is going 6+ a start. I think that sort of meaty underbelly of the bullpen, which is like innings 5 through 7, will be hopefully less exposed, and you can rely less on the Pagans of the world and more on Griffin Jacks and Thielbar and Duran. So I think it's going to have domino effects. The
concern on that is, of the veterans who are, coming back from injury, right? Whether it's Sonny, I mean, not so much Sonny Gray, but Tyler Mahle, Kenta Maeda, etc. How much do they want to gamble on pitches 70 through 90, right? Yep. On these guys. And I don't know what the answer to that is. I feel like they're not that comfortable with Kenta Maeda right now on pitches 70 through 90. I don't know how comfortable they're going to be with Tyler Mahle on pitches 70 through 90. And even though these guys aren't supposed to profile, and let's be realistic, they don't really profile as Dylan Bundy / Chris Archer types, that you're going to have to be careful with that. You're hoping for quite a bit more from them than that level. We'll have to see how much we will start to get a sense of how much they really trust them. Have we heard anything more about the 6-man rotation or about them still bringing Ober in? We haven't heard anything, right?
Ober is literally pitching right now.
I know he is. I saw that. And I saw Maeda was piggybacking with somebody the other day in the game.
Yesterday.
Yeah.
No, there hasn't been much more about that. I'm still assuming it'll be a 5-man rotation, but
and Ober's still down.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that actually, Doe sending me that nerdy spreadsheet, one of the variations he sent me had Ober starting the second game of the season and then being sent down after, which would then push back everyone. But that's obviously they're not going to do that. They announced that it'll be Sonny Gray in game 2 of the season. But yeah, I don't know. The Ober thing is a big question mark. I'm a big believer in Ober at this point, especially he's looked really good this spring.
Was he one of your picks to click?
Yes.
Sorry.
It was. Yeah, it was. I can say it. I published the article 5 days. Right. It was Griffin Jacks, Nick Gordon, Bailey Ober, Trevor Larnach, Giovanni Moran. Those were the 5.
Okay. All right.
Like you mentioned Miranda, but
I was trying to get you mentioned the 2 position players. I was like, here's my bets. Right. Here's my guesses on the 3 pitches. But I did not have Moran in there. I probably should have.
Miranda was ineligible because
he's already over 2.
Had more than 2 wins above replacement last year and is projected to have more than 2 wins above replacement. Like anybody can be like, I expect Carlos Correa to have a huge year.
well, right. Yeah.
And I'm not saying
I don't dislike the filter that you gave at the rules. I would say that something about like somebody who's going to increase their WAR total by at least a full run and a half or something over 50%, something like that.
Yeah, I'm not saying that like picking Griffin Jacks or Bailey Ober or Larnach or something is like on the world's biggest limb, but it is some projection involved.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, I also expect Ed Julian to be really good too, but I mean, who doesn't at this point? Like, that would have been a bolder statement a month and a half ago,
right? Exactly.
Than it is now.
Yeah.
Okay, so a couple more just things and we'll finish up here. But we talked about the bullpen. To me, the issue with the bullpen is just talent, like healthy talent. Like, do they have enough Alcala and Moran and maybe Ronnie Henriquez at some point early in the season, to avoid relying on Pagan, to avoid relying on, fill in the blank? Potentially, yes. If all that goes well and, your high leverage work is Duran, Griffin Jacks, Thielbar, a healthy Alcala, Moran breaking through. I mean, they have the potential to do it. They just don't have as much kind of healthy established guys, which is fine. I mean, I don't know that they've done all that well bringing in healthy established relievers. Joe Smith last year, Colomé the year before that, Pagan being an example of that. So maybe just going with guys like Alcala and Moran and Henriquez and, roll the dice. They have more upside at least. Let's see, the catching duo, which is one of the bigger changes. I feel like because it happened 3 months ago.
Yeah.
That is
fair.
kind of,
you're right. I mean,
by the wayside.
There are a lot of off seasons where that would have been the biggest move that the Twins made. Right. Like they go and they signed a catcher for
$30 million.
$30 million over 3 years. That's a fairly significant signing for almost any team, really. And we just basically paid no attention to it.
Yeah. So Christian Vasquez, who's a longtime Red Sox catcher, will be the opening day starter. He was away from camp with Team Puerto Rico because he was their starting catcher. Hit a big home run for them too in the WBC. There's some question about how are you going to divvy up that playing time? Is it going to be more? So I think Doe 3 weeks ago when I was there asked it in this way, which I thought was good, which is, will who's starting at catcher on a given day be dependent on that player's matchup against the opposing pitcher? In other words, who they think is the best offensively for that day, like Vasquez or Jeffers, but they're both right-handed pitchers, or who you want to pair with your own starting pitcher more.
Right.
In other words, will Jeffers be paired with, I don't know, Ober and Maui or something? Like, will there be sort of personal catchers like that? Will you, for instance, last year, Gary Sanchez, not a good defensive catcher, although he was less abysmal than I expected, but not good. Right. They often paired him with Joe Ryan and or Bailey Ober because those guys they deemed the easiest to catch. Joe Ryan early in the season, all he did was throw fastballs. Right. How hard is that to catch, basically?
Right.
And so they kind of tried to find the least bad fits for Gary Sanchez. Right. Now, Ryan Jeffers does not require that. Ryan Jeffers is a really good defensive catcher, except for throwing.
Right.
And I realize some people are going to think that's like an absurd statement, but like he's decent at blocking pitches. He's really good at framing pitches. The pitchers speak well of him in terms of game planning and game calling. He just doesn't have a strong arm. Right. Vasquez has one of the, now he's a little older, so his arm's not quite as strong as it used to be, but one of the better arms of the last decade among regular catchers. Pitch framing numbers aren't quite as strong as Jeffers, but they're solid. Really good blocking pitches, and then just gets tons of praise for, game management, game calling, game planning, whatever you want to call that stuff. My question with that is like, okay, it's two right-handed hitters, but we saw that with Jeffers and Garver, or last year with Jeffers and Sanchez. It's hard to like mix and match when they're very similar stylistically, offensively at least. My assumption is it's going to be Vasquez as sort of your traditional starting catcher, like 2/3 of the time, let's say. And then Jeffers 1/3, 30 to 40% of the time Jeffers, with most of those starts for Jeffers coming against left-handed pitchers. Because that's at least the one thing he's proven he can do is hit left-handed pitchers. Now, it sucks for Vasquez that because Vasquez is a right-handed hitter too, so he would love to face as many lefties as possible. But he's shown less of a extreme platoon split. He's less advantaged against left-handed hitters. So if you want to give Jeffers a role where he can kind of work his way into the mix and give him matchups that are favorable to him, I think it would be him versus most lefties.
If we get Buxton back out in center field, I can see where that would be, Jeffers starting at DH versus left-handers on a pretty regular basis. I thought going into this, presuming that Buxton was going to be playing mostly center field this season, right? that was kind of I thought Jeffers was going to have probably more starts at DH than I think people were anticipating. That he brings that, his right-handed bat plays real well versus those lefties. So one way or the other, you want him in that mix, and that's fine. If you still want Vasquez behind the plate, great, go ahead. Yeah, let's have Jeffers bring the big right-handed bat over into that spot. So
yeah, that'd be fine. I think that would make some sense. Let's see. Talked about injuries. Okay, here's a good place that kind of brings a bunch of stuff we've talked about together, which is this is something we talked about endlessly during the Terry Ryan era. And I think we've talked about it quite a bit, particularly when it comes to the bullpen during this regime, the last 3 to 5 years, which is how quickly are they willing to admit defeat on some decisions with veteran players, especially.
Right.
And turn to.
You have somebody in mind in the bullpen?
No, of course not. Well, you know what? Yeah, let's talk about it. I'm not going to name names. Let's call him E. Pagan. Actually, no. That reveals. Let's call him Emilio P. Just to keep things anonymous. Do you know what I mean? No, but like we saw it with Colomé. We saw it with Pagan last year, obviously.
Right. Yeah.
We've seen it with some starting pitchers, Matt Shoemaker, J. Happ type of thing. It's always subjective. Like they did ditch Matt Shoemaker relatively quickly, but it was not quickly enough.
Right.
And that was a weakness, I would say, of the Terry Ryan regime, which is they always had they stuck with Juan Castro for like 2 years at shortstop and let Jason Bartlett hit like 320 at Rochester for like 2 years. Like it's always subjective, but I think it's one thing to smartly stockpile depth, Taylor, Farmer, on and on, that type of guy. Even some bullpen guys. Because, Pagan is depth. He's veteran depth.
Yes, he is.
And it's great to, as we talked about a few minutes ago, have Lee and Lewis and Julian and Wallner and Martin and on and on and on and Louis Varlin and Simeon Woods Richardson, all these guys in the minors waiting in the wings. The reinforcements are just a call away. It's great to do all that. And sometimes injuries are just going to make the decision for you.
Correct.
Where it's like there's
that almost becomes fortunate way to make it to get it in there. Right.
It's we're down 2 corner outfielders. Wallner's coming up versus you're healthy, but one of your, Joey Gallo's hitting 170 or Max Kepler's hitting 210 or whatever.
Right.
Then it's a much tougher call to be like, are we ready to part ways with this veteran and call up Matt Wallner? Or, if Farmer and Solano and Gordon are not getting it done at second base.
Right.
Are we ready to part ways with one of those guys that we brought in as veteran depth, established, good reputation veteran, and call up Ed Julian to play second? Those are much tougher decisions when you have to actually make them, as opposed to just injuries make them for you. And so that I feel like Ober, if they don't start with a 6-man rotation and they end up sending Ober to AAA, or even if he begins the year as a long reliever somehow, well, what happens if Maeda's first 4 starts go really badly?
Right.
And his velocity is bad.
Or 2. His first 2 starts.
And so I think that is one of the biggest key to this season is the same as the biggest key to last season, which is injuries and depth. But then within that, I think this season presents a particularly, important pivot points for them or decision points for them of, all right, we got all this veteran depth, but when do we decide we've gotten enough out of them?
Yep.
And when do we decide, all right, let's bring up the youngsters. Like whether it's Royce Lewis in June or July, somebody's going to have to go for Royce Lewis. Somebody at some point is going to go for Ed Julian. Somebody at some point is probably going to go for Matt Wallner. Like you have all these guys, Louis Varlin. They're going to let Louis Varlin win a 3rd straight minor league pitcher of the year award, or are they going to bump somebody from the rotation for him at some point? And Ober, obviously the same thing. Like Ober deserves to be in the rotation now. So to me, that's like one of these, you'd like to think that that'll go smoothly and they'll just kind of gradually incorporate a different youngster every 4 weeks or something like that. And then at the end of the season, you look at the lineup and the lineup's got 3 rookies producing and the 2 in the bullpen and all that. But that's not really how it's going to go. And so that's one of the unanswerable questions that I have, which is like when push comes to shove, and if injuries don't make the decisions for you, when do you ditch a Donovan Solano for an Ed Julian? Or when do you ditch a Kenta Maeda for a Bailey Ober? Or when do you ditch an Emilio Pagan for Ronnie
Trevor
Hickory
McGill
or whatever?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah, or all that stuff. So, but I don't know, like, how do you predict that? And I don't even think they know how they'll predict that. But
There's two stories to kind of, I guess, three stories to follow there. The first is sort of, how are the veterans doing? And then jointly with that is, how's the potential replacement doing? Is somebody, is Julian just tearing it up in AAA? And you're like, it's time to find this guy a spot, or, similarly, Giovanni Moran doesn't make the roster and he's tearing it up down there. And you're like, oh, boy, sure would trust him more in the seventh spot than Emilio Pagan at this point. So that's the first one. It's sort of that sliding scale between the two as to, how much do I trust this guy versus how much do I trust that guy?
It's different if Ed Julian is hitting 300 with a 450 on base percentage at AAA versus if Ed Julian's just hitting like 250 and drawing some walks, where it's not bad, but he doesn't really push the issue. Yeah.
But that hasn't seemed to be sort of the problem. Well, sometimes that is the problem. I mean, I would argue that was the biggest problem with Chris Archer last year, with some of the decisions that have been made, is that, we're seeing the veterans struggle, but we don't have the replacement right now. For instance, with Emilio Pagan, I mean, I see guys in AAA that I would probably pick over Emilio Pagan right now, but there's no like, Jesus, we got to get this guy on the roster sitting there in St. Paul. Like, I've got to get McGill on this roster. I'd probably pick him. All things being equal, I'd probably pick him over Pagan right now. Yeah. But there's concerns over there too. So that has been part of the problem in the past. I actually think the Twins probably have received too much criticism sometimes on that. We see the guy performing poorly, and he's a veteran, and we know they spent money on him. And so we're like, we've got to replace him with a box of fruit, whatever you can do, just get him off of this roster, right? And they do have to actually think a little bit like we do have to have somebody that's, you're not fixing the problem if the new person comes up and also stinks, right? But then the other thing that I think you can be critical about with this organization is they don't like giving up on assets. And how will they react when so many of their assets are on a 1-year contract? And, will they be more willing to cut bait? If Wallner is tearing it up or Kirilloff is tearing it up and Gallo is flailing, how that they making that change on May 1st? Are they making that change by July 1st? Are they making that change by August 1st? Because that's generally when we've seen it happen, right? It's been middle of June. It's been somewhere between June 15th and August 31st. What's the over under on when they are ready to give up on that contract? Yeah. And I would hope that, given the sort of urgency that is surrounding this team this year and the level of expectations, and also just the number of 1-year contracts that you've got on here, and the depth that they seemingly have sitting at St. Paul, that they move that up from the July 1st to July 31st point to as early as May 15th to June 15th, something like that.
Yeah. I mean, it depends. Obviously, if you're in first place or something like that, even if individual guys are struggling, you're a little more hesitant to rock the boat. The way I would phrase it relative to the Ryan regime, I felt that most often under Ryan and Ron Gardenhire, the Twins were both hesitant to turn to position players till they felt they were like fully developed, whatever that meant.
Yeah, right.
And they were hesitant to ditch veterans out of like respect for veterans.
Correct.
Whereas I think this regime is hesitant to ditch veterans out of the respect for veterans. Although I think, to your point, it's more about like maintaining depth that way. I don't think they're as hesitant to call up prospects who maybe aren't fully developed. But I don't know functionally that there's that much difference if you're still hesitant to ditch the veterans. Like, right. I think this group is more willing to call up Miranda or, fill in the blank with whoever. They've called up a decent amount of young players, pitchers and hitters over the past 7 years or whatever. I think they're more willing to do that. But if you're not more willing to ditch the current guys you have in that role, functionally, it doesn't really matter that you end up keeping guys at AAA past the point when you might call them up anyway, because you didn't want to ditch Kenta Maeda or you didn't want to ditch, I don't know, Donovan Solano or whatever. So yeah, I'm very curious to see how that plays out. Okay, so to end on, we both picked over. We both gave win totals. You said 87.
I said 87. You said 88.
Yeah, I'm always more optimistic than you. I just took the Price is Right approach to.
I was in general, you're just a much more optimistic guy than me.
It's true.
Much more half full.
Do we think we didn't really say? Do we want to say whether that will win the division or not? In our minds, these brilliant minds that we have, these beautiful minds that you can now listen to for an hour and a half, or should we just leave that up to 50-50? Because I will be honest, I kind of view it as 50-50. I think
I put it at 40%, which is still might be the best of the two teams.
Yeah, I wouldn't say the Twins have a 50% chance to win the division because Chicago still has some chance.
Right.
15-20%, something like that. I just mean between the Twins and Guardians, I do kind of view it as a coin flip. I think Cleveland is a really good team. I don't think Cleveland is capable of being a great team. And I think, some more randomness with injuries and all that will cut them down to size a little bit. I think similar to the Twins. I think the Twins are a good team. I don't know that this Twins team is capable of being a great team, but I also think they'll have better injury luck, although you'd be hard pressed to come to that assumption or come to that conclusion after listening to the show talk about all the injuries. But yeah, I kind of view them both in the 85 to 90 win range, which you would think logically 90 wins will win the AL Central.
Right. Yeah, I think that's right.
And it probably will. So I guess I say the Twins will win 88. So really it just comes down to, do I think Cleveland will win 87, 88, 89, 90, something like that? I just view it as kind of it's a cop-out, but I view it as kind of a coin flip.
I'll say no, they won't. I'll go the safe route.
You are so pessimistic.
I am. Yeah, this injury news has got me annoyed. Maybe that's it. Maybe I'm just reacting to the injury news of the week.
What if we just choose today as the turning point for both of us on this show, and from now on you become incredibly cynical and skeptical and sarcastic?
That's a good idea.
And I just become the lover of life and people. What if we do that?
Which one of the two of us would have more trouble adjusting?
Yeah. I don't think I could do what you do, Jess. I really don't.
I'm not sure I could do what you do.
Yeah, but be an a-hole all day. Yeah.
I'll throw myself down a place. Life's so miserable. Yeah. I gotta stop.
I hope you like cats. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So that's our official season preview. If you've made it this far into this podcast, I would argue that by definition, you should be signing up for the Patreon podcast.
Absolutely.
You've proven that you would like to hear us talk more Twins. So go to patreon.com/Gleeman. That's Patreon. Sign up. We got almost, 4,000 people signed up. It's our kind of private club for a little off the record Twins talk, a little more in-depth discussion, some guests, some mailbag, drop a few F-bombs, talk about topics that we might not hit on in the weekly show. We would love to have you join us for this season. It would mean it's the best and easiest way to show support for this podcast.
Sure.
Because it means a lot to us and you get extra episodes.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Thank you to all of our sponsors, Sunday and Harry's and Forgotten Star. I'll show up for opening day. It's going to be awesome. And Stathead to nerd out. And we will. I don't know exactly when the next episode will be. It might be next Friday. It might be next weekend sometime. And we will talk to you then.
Gleeman